Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited about our group today that's going to be chatting about development equity, and we'll get into how we define that and how we think about that. But to kick things off with a quick intro, my name is Tess Manning. I am the head of enterprise sales at Ethena, which is a modern compliance training platform for innovative teams, focused on both compliance and culture change. And as a quick overview before I turn it over to our panelists, really excited today to be talking about development equity. As we all know, this last year has afforded organizations to rethink the way they're working and who within the organization is leading which strategies and which teams. And it's a really interesting opportunity for organizations both to think about the challenges and opportunities that the shift to a more virtual world affords. Bless you. Bless you, Anne. We're all negative, don't worry. But what this opportunity is for organizations to think about how they're identifying emerging leaders in an inclusive way now that we're not necessarily all around each other, and the historic way of finding emerging leaders might have been, as we discussed in our prep call, finding someone that you sit next to in the office that becomes your mentee and someone that you're championing along through the next phase of their career. The world looks very different now, and so we're going to dive a little bit today into how we think about tapping and supporting emerging managers within organizations. So super excited to be with this incredible group. I will let them all do a quick round robin on their names and short bios. Stephen, kick it off.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tess, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Stephen Bailey. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ExecOnline. We are a B2B leadership development company in the corporate training space, and kind of what we pioneered back in 2012 when we founded the company was this idea that you could develop leaders effectively online. And you could do it in a high quality way that democratized access for a much broader set of leaders. And we actually did that by partnering with some of the world's best business schools to take what were their on-campus experiences and bring them fully online. And actually, Mike Rielly from Berkeley was our first partner, so it'll be a very interesting conversation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Boggs. I work for Accenture, which is a global company doing technology, among many other things. I'm responsible for our corporate citizenship program in the United States, and that includes all of the work that we do in strategic grant-making around our signature initiative we call Skills to Succeed, as well as all of our employee giving and volunteering. Glad to be here.
Mike Rielly, I'm the CEO of UC Berkeley Executive Education. I've been with the Haas School of Business for 14 years. I was the assistant dean, helping launch and then running our executive MBA program. Before that, I was on the faculty teaching sports marketing because I used to be a sports agent representing professional golfers for 20 plus years. And yes, we're so proud to be your first university partner. And today we are significantly virtual, and you got us into this space. So thank you, Stephen, and ExecOnline.
Hi, I'm Ann McDaniel, and I am a consultant with Graham Holdings Company, which you might have known in its earlier iteration as the Washington Post Company. I've been with the company for about 37 years, but we sold the Washington Post, so we gave it the family name of the Grahams. My relevant experience to this is actually, I've done everything from I spent half my career as a journalist, so doing a lot about communicating about the news. And in the second half of my career, I've been a business person, all for the same company, all in the media space. But I oversaw HR reported to me, and so I oversaw some learning and development programs, and also worked as a business leader trying to think about what the business problems were. Right now, I'm CEO of a small company they own called Foreign Policy, which is a media events and research business.
Thank you all. We're lucky to have each of you here. So Stephen, want you to kick us off. In your words and perspective, how would you define development equity? What does that mean to you? Why do you care about it? And would love for you to share a little bit about the Development Equity Council that you've created recently.
Thank you so much. So development equity is a relatively new concept. It might be a term that you're hearing for the first time. And it's something that we pioneered really over the last year and a half as we thought about how to institutionalize a lot of company interest in improved diversity within their organizations. And if you sort of look for a corollary, we looked historically, because we're systems thinkers, so we're thinking about, how do we create long-term change that isn't just relying on individuals, but is really relying on changing systems. And so we were looking for effective models, and we looked at pay equity, right? And there's still a lot of progress to be made, but a lot of the progress in gender-based pay equity over the past 10 years has been a result of naming the problem, right? Pay equity, companies holding themselves accountable to publishing data around their pay gaps, and then reporting how they're closing those gaps over time through a variety of different strategies. And so the way to think about development equity is applying that same model to development. And so if you define development equity, it's providing equitable access to structured, high-quality leadership development opportunities to historically underrepresented groups. And that could be based on gender, race, sexual orientation, first generation, sort of college graduates, the full range, and companies holding themselves accountable around the right set of data to understand how they're distributing opportunity within their organizations. Because the most difficult challenge that organizations face from a diversity perspective is actually at the leadership level. How do you create leadership progression so that your leadership pipelines and ultimately your leadership teams look like the diversity that exists in broader society?
Thank you. Do you want to chat a little bit about the council itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Development Equity Council is something we put together to sort of help us bring that vision to life. So at this point, over 36 companies. And Anne has actually been a participant in our Development Equity Council meetings to really help further define the concept, think about what sort of data companies should be collecting and publishing, and then how they should be evaluating their talent management systems to identify bias and ultimately offer the types of development opportunities that are going to move forward people in their careers and help them achieve sort of more diversity within their pipelines.
Amazing. So quick follow-up on that. Are these companies actually creating a transparent way of sharing that data with one another? Because there's definitely a big movement toward more public display of
I think
data.
that's the big elephant in the room, right? Is what data are you collecting? What data are you sharing? I think one of the challenges is particularly when you get into data around identity. So whether it's gender data, race data, companies get nervous. What can we collect? What can we share? And so a lot of our discussions have really been built around what are some of the best practices that companies can pursue in order to collect data in ways that are going to make their employees sort of comfortable and actually excited about the fact that they're doing this work as opposed to skeptical. And we can get into some of those best practices, but clearly data is very much at the top of the list.
Excellent. Great. Well, let me go to the other end of the aisle here, and we can kick off with Anne for the next question. Anne, you've been a part of many incredible organizations over your career. How would you think about the status quo right now of how leaders are identified within an organization, and how are they supported? What's broken with the way things exist today?
Well, COVID changed everything, of course, because we're not all sitting in an office together. But even on even in the Zoom world or the virtual world that we're all living in now, I actually worry that not enough has changed. Certainly, things like George Floyd's murder last year and other protests throughout the country have put companies and leaders on notice that you better change your ways of operating if you're not aiming towards diversity. That consumers and clients care and will let you know when they're looking at you how you can improve. I think we have to think about diversity as a business problem and a solution as opposed to being the right moral thing to do. I'm not disputing that it is the right and moral thing to do, but I'm saying in my role, at least within a larger organization, the way to convince any group that change is necessary, any business group that change is necessary, is show what the business imperative is, show what the return on investment is likely going to be. If you have a more diverse panel, more diverse leadership, you will get more diverse ideas, better situations. There are just so many things. One of the examples that I learned early in my career when I was a journalist Many of you, I worked at Newsweek, which was then owned by the Washington Post Company too. Many of you will remember on Time magazine, they had a cover of O.J. Simpson where they had darkened the beard a little bit during the time of the Simpson trial. I mean, the Simpson Bronco chase, I think it was right in that time. It turned out that there were no people of color who looked at that cover before it was published, or at least were in leadership positions who felt comfortable going, is that really how we want to portray this? Similarly, Newsweek did a cover at one point called Single Women. You're more likely to be hit by a terrorist was the line than get married if you're a single woman over 35. I worked for Newsweek at the time. I was over 35 and I was single. I haven't been hit by a terrorist, but I haven't gotten married either, so it could have been correct. But there wasn't one single woman involved in doing the story. Those are my simplest, basic examples. They don't work in all places, but find what it is within your organization that shows the absolute necessity. Stephen and I have the privilege of both being on the corporate board of directors of the Match Group, which is the group that owns Match.com and Tinder and Plenty of Fish and a few sites I expect all of you have heard of and many of you have used. Last year, we spun off from a bigger media company, IAC, and one of the things Joey Levin, then our chairman of the board, was committed to doing was, when I had joined the board 5 years earlier, there'd been 3 women and 6 men. All the men were white, all the men were older, and all the men were connected to the parent company very closely. When we spun off, we recruited Stephen, we recruited Wendy Murdoch, we recruited Ryan Reynolds, the movie star. We're not sure what diversity he fills, but no, he's a marketing genius. That is why Ryan Reynolds is on the board. So we didn't look, if you can look at the top of organizations and try to change them, it will trickle down lower. And I apologize for my long answer.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And that story is very, feeling very near to me as well about single under 35.
Newsweek's been proven wrong many, many times. As the former managing director of Newsweek, I can say that.
Mike, when we turn to you for an answer on this as well, but it would be interesting for you to weave in a little bit about, how both Haas and Berkeley more broadly thinks about the mission around development equity.
Sure. We haven't called it development equity, but we've been offering development equity since 1868. We're the original University of California campus. UCLA was our southern branch in 1919. And UC Davis was our farm outside of Sacramento in 1905. But we are all about offering education to students from all backgrounds since our inception in 1868. In 1870, the Regents made the decision to welcome young ladies on equal terms with all similar access to young men. And this was before women had the right to vote. It is in our DNA as the world's premier public university. The Haas School of Business was founded by a woman named Cora Jane Flood in 1898. She gave land and money to Berkeley with one condition: start the College of Commerce. So thanks to her vision and generosity, we're the second oldest business school in the United States. Anybody here from Penn or that Wharton school? You're the first. We're also the only top-tier business school that was founded by a woman. Our current dean, Ann Harrison, my direct report, I report directly to her, is committed to making the Haas School of Business the world's most innovative, inclusive, and sustainable business school. And as part of her leadership team, I'm part of the 5-year plan that we've just developed. And what I can say to you is that even though this development equity is in our DNA, we still have a long way to go. And this is not easy. We're being very intentional in 5 or 6 areas, which I'm happy to touch upon later if you'd like. But yes, it's in our DNA, but we're not there yet, 154 years later, and we're still working on it.
Can I poke a little bit on that and say what are some of the top challenges when you say there's a long way to go?
Diversifying the applicant pool and improving our procedures, our processes to move the needle with our 6-degree programs, our faculty, our board, our leadership team, and our staff. And each of these initiatives have owners, and each of these owners have monthly and yearly tactics and milestones. And each of these pipelines have unique challenges. It's fascinating to go deep on what we have to do as a public university, a scrappy, under-resourced university, to continue moving the needle in these 5 or 6 areas.
Thanks. And Robin, as I learned last week, you have been at Accenture for
23 years.
3 years. Which is amazing.
It's a little scary.
And would love to hear from your perspective. I'm sure you've seen a lot of change there. What progress has been made and what is left to do?
Sure. So I started at Accenture in June of 1998. And the joke back then, well, first of all, it was still Anderson Consulting at the time, and the joke back then was we were all androids, and we largely looked the same. It was primarily white, almost exclusively college educated, a bunch of mostly young people running around in dark blue suits doing work for their clients. So that's what it looked like when I started. I'm proud to say that now Accenture, thanks to some really visionary leadership over time, has had a long-standing commitment to equality and to being a place where people can feel comfortable and thrive. And what's interesting for me about Accenture is that it's not just about what we do internally with our people, which I think is pretty incredible, but we have really doubled down on how we think about the work that we're doing with our clients, and what we're doing in terms of sustainably leaving a legacy in the communities where we're living and working. So we have certainly programs that cover all those, and I can go into those sort of now. All right, so I guess I'll start with, from an inclusion and diversity perspective internally, and again, having that commitment to make sure people feel comfortable, that everybody can be truly human within the company. And as a sidebar, I'll just say, if you've ever seen the video, Inclusion Starts With I, take a look at, just literally type in Accenture Inclusion Starts With I, it'll come up on YouTube. That'll give you a good perspective for how we think about inclusion and how we think about people feeling comfortable. Sorry, I didn't get to think about bringing that with me. So we offer a number of programs. We're like every other company. We have employee resource groups where people can self-select in. But what I think has been really impressive for me, both as an employee and as a leader at Accenture, is that we're very public around our commitments around inclusion and diversity. So for example, several years ago, we made a commitment by 2025 to have 50% of our workforce globally be women. We have a commitment around 25% of our managing directors also being women. In response to some of the unrest last year, we made really aggressive commitments about promoting African Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, with targets that are about 60% higher in terms of percentage of representation in the workforce than we've had in the past. And so it's absolutely something that our leaders think about every day, they talk about every day. The expectations for delivering on inclusion and diversity cascade all the way down to really every level of person at Accenture. I was just writing performance reviews just yesterday, and interestingly, one of the prompting questions I had to respond to as a people lead was, what has your person been doing around inclusion and diversity and equality at Accenture? It really has just been now woven into the fabric. Do I think we have room to grow? Absolutely. We're just like every company. We have really made, again, aggressive commitments around developing talent at Accenture, diverse talent from a variety of different backgrounds. But we still have a challenge getting the large number of really motivated, high potential young people who are coming in their first couple of years and retaining them and sustaining them and continuing to grow them. So there has been a lot of investment over the years at creating special leadership development programs, some of which are selective, some of which are self-select. So there's lots of opportunities for people in that. And just really quickly, I'll just briefly touch on what we're doing sort of from our client perspective. We recognize that we are on the forefront of some of the technology these days that sometimes gets a bad rap for not being friendly, like things like artificial intelligence and the biases around that. There's also all the, I'm sure you guys have seen some of the things about facial recognition and problems with facial recognition technology. We have a role in some of that technology as it gets rolled out. But Julie Sweet, our CEO, is very committed to Accenture acting both sustainably and responsibly. So we are really looking carefully at things like ethical AI, and we have teams of people who really focus on that and make sure that our people are aware of bias that can come in either intentionally or unintentionally, and how do we go about trying to avoid it. And then finally, from a community perspective, one of the things that's been great about Accenture is that we recognize that at the heart of what we do is developing people. And so that commitment we have to growing our talent. Our former CEO, Bill Green, was a community college graduate who thought he was going to be a plumber, became CEO of Accenture. So he's a pretty incredible story. So you cascade that. We think we have an opportunity to take that core capability out into the community. And so we focus, at least in the United States, almost exclusively on trying to serve underrepresented communities. We'll have about 1,500 kids, young adults, come through our internship programs this year, and that group is 90% diverse. So we're quite proud of that.
That's incredible across the board. So excited to hear it. And I think a lot of conversations I was having yesterday outside of panels were around who's setting these commitments from the C-suite within an organization. Someone who previously worked at BlackRock was saying sometimes, the CEO runs around and publicly announces a commitment, BlackRock's, and then the rest of the team scrambles to try to actually put the plan in place to live up to those. So I think that's a perfect segue, Robin, for the rest of you to chime in on, how do you think about setting goals for development equity? Who is deciding them? How are you measuring progress against them, especially in an area where there's a lot of gray lines and not a lot of great data collection?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it starts with collecting really high quality baseline data. You'd be really surprised in large organizations if you were to ask, what are the percentage of women that are represented in your leadership development programs, or African Americans, or first generation college graduates. Most companies have no idea what the answer to that question is. And then you say, okay, well, what does success look like? There's no benchmark to say, okay, if we get here, we have made progress. And so really organizations are flying blind, but instead of looking at leading indicators, like leadership development pipelines, they're looking at lagging indicators like the representation on their senior management team. Well, I can tell you what your senior management team is going to look like 5 years from now by the percentage of underrepresented groups in your leadership development programs or other, sort of forms of leadership opportunity, right, earlier in that progression, whether they be aspiring managers, frontline managers. And so a lot of what we work to do is to say, how can you collect this data in a way that's going to allow you to get a really good view of what your sort of leading indicators are. And so just a couple of pieces of advice for organizations that are thinking about how do I collect sensitive data. So first is, be really clear about your message to employees around why you're collecting the data. Most people are really excited if their organization is saying, we want to invest in more equitable leadership, and so we're collecting this data to hold ourselves accountable. Right. Secondly, initially make the data collection voluntary. So don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. You can sort of say to people, we would love for you to participate if you'd like. If you feel uncomfortable, you can opt out. But getting those initial data sets really helps you kind of set the lay of the land. And then thirdly, think about it from an MVP type of perspective. You don't have to benchmark everything overnight. You can choose a certain subset of programs. You can choose a certain part of the business where maybe you've got some early adopters that are going to really help drive it at the leadership level. And what you'll find is that organizations that make those investments then really start to build momentum. And as the organization sees you using that data to hold yourself accountable and make progress, more and more people sort of get on board.
And Mike, either one of you?
Well, I was just thinking, I come from where I'm working on right now is a very small company, so I was thinking about how I'm sort of the opposite from Accenture. We have 50 employees, and so I began to think and we're not a profitable company yet. Soon we will be. But I was thinking about how do I foster leadership development in such a small group of people, and then foster inclusion and diversity in an area where I have relatively few openings. People don't leave very frequently, and certainly in the economic climate we've been in, this may be changing now, but in the economic climate we've been in, we haven't had much churn. And I think you have to set realistic goals that go, say, over a 3-year period for an organization my size, as opposed to what we're going to do this year. But I also was really resonating with what Stephen was saying about you can tell how your organization is going to look at the future when you look at that level of people you are offering management to. And since Mike and Stephen do things that are completely different than what I do, I can commend to you the idea of doing online training. I did executive education because when you go from journalism to business, you and your bosses quickly learn you know nothing about business. After 3 years in business, they finally decided maybe I ought to get educated. And because I didn't know Mike yet, and I didn't know Stephen yet, I ended up at that business school in Cambridge. And in my executive education program, there were 120 men, all of them married, and 28 women. And Harvard had hired somebody to do a study on why more women weren't involved in this executive education. Why weren't they coming? Well, for a lot less than they were going to pay, I was willing to simply answer the question. One is, it cost a lot of money. It cost then the Washington Post company about $80,000 for me to go, not including what they paid me in salary while I was gone. It also, or any kind of, filling in for me while I was gone, because I was completely gone for 9 weeks. The rules of the program were you had classes 6 days a week, and you weren't supposed to go home at all on the weekends. I lived in a group of, you lived in study groups. Every study group was 7 men and 1 woman. There were people of color. There were many, many more. It was diverse from a geographic and racial and ethnic standpoint. But women just simply weren't included. And so as I hear Stephen and Mike talk now, I think about how do you offer, not only you select people, because I think it's still fairly similar in a lot of organizations that if you get spotted by one of the people in leadership and mentored through, you have a better chance. But how do we offer leadership development and training and diversity training for just anybody who would want it? And I think the kinds of things that are happening online are incredible because they're much more cost effective and because they can be done at any time. But I do also encourage you to look at another thing that we've learned in COVID is we have to build our workplaces around people's lives and schedules. And so, again, doing things online means you give more people the opportunity to meet the other needs in their lives. So I think, the data is extremely important in the way Stephen is gathering it, and we all have to do that and need to do that to understand. But you also need to be able to educate your team and your customers that having a 2 or 3 year plan may be smarter than having a 6-month or 1 year plan, even though you need to measure yourself and hold yourself to goals all throughout that 3 year period.
That's a great clarification too, Anne, between what we're talking about today, because there's the identification of potential leaders and setting the commitments around diversity metrics, for instance, and then there's the actual delivery, right? As people always talk about the difference between diversity and inclusion, it's like, great, we have the right people around the table, now how do we ensure they're included? So in this topic, we're discussing how to support someone through that next learning phase. So maybe that's a good segue, Mike, to talk a little bit about how the exec ed program at Haas thinks about supporting diverse learners through maybe personal and professional challenges along the way.
As a top business school and the #1 public executive education organization, we believe strongly in a diverse classroom, a diverse cohort. We believe that diversity in the classroom leads to stronger leadership and more diverse and stronger organizations. So we're committed to that fundamentally. On the degree side, we spend a lot of time through the admissions process finding that right mix of individuals that represent different backgrounds, industries, and aspirations. It's really important to not just go for the highest test scores or the best essays, but to really, really intentionally design that cohort for that learning objective, which is strong leaders and strong organizations. So, and to your question about how we measure, we take our most, and this is public information. If there's a journalist in the room, you can go to Poets and Quants and get the same information. That's for those of you that don't know, I like to describe Poets and Quants as the Vanity Fair for business schools.
The New York Post.
This latest cohort of our full-time MBAs is 39% women. We look at women, underrepresented minorities, U.S. minorities, 39%, international students, 17%, first generation, 14%, and number of countries represented, 35. And that's for 330 students. So that didn't just happen. To my point earlier about the challenges that each one of these pipelines have, we're doing this as a public university. We do not have the resources or the scholarships that our private competitors have. We're the only top 10 business school that's public. I don't think Michigan's in the top 10 right now, and NYU is not. So we do this because it is part of our DNA, because it's part of our leadership's commitment. It's who we are, and we're very, very intentional about these initiatives, these tactics, and these results that we look at monthly and yearly. For Exec Ed, we also look at our curriculum. If you go to Poets and Quants, they just announced 3 very Berkeley courses. We've just redeveloped our core curriculum for the MBA program, and including a course on diversity in the workplace, along with that belief that diversity in the workplace leads to stronger organizations. At Exec Ed, we have, with ExecOnline, an Advancing Women Leaders program, and Stephen might want to talk about that. We've got a Black VC program helping African Americans, and you were a featured guest in that program of ours. We have a board diversity workshop, and we have a Black enterprise course in partnership with the Urban League of San Francisco. So we're moving not just the design of our classrooms and our cohorts, but the design of our curriculum to meet what we think tomorrow's workforce needs to learn at the Haas School of Business. Do you want to talk about advancing women leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us, it's as we think about our curriculum, we're thinking about how do you attack, and you're making the same point, Mike, and you as well. Really everyone, Robin. How do you attack this from multiple angles, right? It's multiple pipelines. It's not one answer, right? So we've got a great Accelerating Women Leaders series with Berkeley, and we've got more coming in that series shortly. We announced a partnership with Darden, Accelerating Leaders of Color. And we've got with Yale a broader, sort of diversity program for all, sort of leaders to think about how they can be more inclusive in their decision making. So this is a multi-pronged approach. And then I would say when you think about leadership development more broadly outside of diversity-specific types of training, one key takeaway, as you think about leadership development, it's not just about learning, it's also about visibility. So as leaders are participating in programs, are you building opportunities for visibility into those programs, stretch assignments that they can apply their learnings to, opportunities to present what they've worked on to senior leaders in the organization so that perhaps the organizational perception is changed? Because when you're in a lot of these succession planning types of meetings and leaders are not being advanced, it's usually not because this leader was given an opportunity and they failed. It's often we don't know because this individual has been put in a position to prove that they're ready for that next level of leadership.
Amazing. I would love to join in on some of these courses. They sound incredible.
Anytime.
And building off of that, one of the things that we had talked about as a group too is, what are all of the interesting partnerships that your organizations have with either outside third-party groups or that you're building internally to support these goals around development equity? We've had a few examples, but what are some more?
Well, I'll give a few. We have doubled down on our engagement with the HBCU and the HSI. institutions, so that's been really important for us. And we're also starting to look at sort of beyond the traditional ponds that we have normally fished in for talent, and starting to really diversify that. I manage a whole team of people focused on impact hiring that's looking at how we take some of our community partnerships with organizations like Goodwill and Year Up and NPower and Perscalis and IC Stars, who is here, and try to pathway graduates from those programs into actual jobs at Accenture. So that's been a really important part of our program. And then I know from an internal perspective, we've got a lot of different partnerships that we look at for different things like unconscious bias training. We get outside experts to help with that. We've done some great work recently with Thrive Global, just around mindsets and other things that I think are really helping to make our people become just generally more aware of themselves and more aware of how they are and how other people are around them. That's been really impactful.
We're doing, we have increased our relationships also with the historically black colleges, as well as worked with organizations, continue to work with organizations with foreign policy who, the Asian Journalists Association, the Black Journalists Association, and I think in some ways even more practically, internally, what we've decided to is we need interns and sort of temporary employees a fair amount in our business. And so we are committing all of those positions to be positions that bring in people of different perspectives than the staff generally has so far. Where areas that we are not suitably represented, we're filling those positions. And then we try, because many of those positions for us are a year long, we try, if we have openings in our small staff in that interim period, if that person has performed well, to do that. So we are trying to recruit from a number of different organizations that we haven't recruited and partnered with in the past, but we're also designating slots, not to have specific a quota, but to have areas where we can bring lots of different people with different skills in from lots of different backgrounds, and hope that they will prove to be valuable partners and be able to contribute for more than 1 year.
We work closely with ExecOnline for advancing women leaders, believe it or not. We work with the Black Venture Institute for our VC program, with the Urban League for this Black Enterprise program we're launching. We work on campus with the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership, EGAL, which is one of Haas's many centers and institutes. And we do a lot of this on our own. We have an incredibly committed team to this, to DEI. But ExecOnline helps us bring our important work beyond the traditional boundaries of the university. This is why we love working with partners like ExecOnline.
Thank you all. And I know we're close to time here, so maybe a quick final question here. Aside from your own organizations, who's another company that you would consider an exemplar in building out a diverse leadership group and thinking about the leaders of tomorrow, as you said nicely, Mike? And you don't have to pick a favorite, Stephen. It can be like one,
Well, I'll just talk about, sort of an organization. So our mission, I sort of talked a little bit about why we started the company. When we think about our mission, it's to connect all leaders to their future potential. I think about other organizations that are doing that. I'll highlight, just because I come from the venture world, and I've been in a lot of rooms and not seen a lot of people who look like me over the years. And so, sort of Mike mentioned the Black Venture Institute, what they're doing to help diversify venture, which has been one of the hardest areas to diversify, I think is truly exceptional. And I've been fortunate enough to participate as a faculty member in the Black Venture Institute program. And if you haven't heard of the organization, look it up. They're doing really great things that I admire.
I'm fortunate to have been able to work with a number of other companies, a lot of whom are our clients, on some of the work we've done, especially in the communities, and have a great deal of respect for companies like JP Morgan Chase. Jamie Dimon's been really leading the way when it comes to apprenticeships through his organization Here to Here. They were also really big sponsors of the Second Chance Business Coalition, which just launched recently, helping people who have been incarcerated. That's unfortunately a group that is very highly diverse, and we're thrilled to be a part of that collaboration. Great deal of respect for Walmart, for Salesforce, for all the work that they continue to do, just to create opportunities for others to get into meaningful employment.
I like what your alma mater is doing, Stanford, in the LGBTQ plus space. But I have a soft spot for the underdogs, so I like what Darden, Michigan, and Berkeley are doing. We are scrappy, and we're working really hard to have impact. So just on effort alone, I'm going to give a shout out to the Publix.
And I'll close with a group I mentioned to Stephen earlier that Graham Holdings is working with called Management Training Leaders of Tomorrow, MLT. John King, and they are doing very sort of granular diversity training and inclusion training for us throughout the organization. And I have been thrilled with how practical they are, how realistic they are, how helpful they are to CEOs like me of a small company, but then we have within Graham Holdings companies of tens of thousands of employees. So we need different kinds of help in those, and this has been great, very granular training, so I'd commend them to you.
Thank you all. That was fantastic. Appreciate all of the insights.
Thank you, Tess.
Thank you, Tess.